Thank you. Thank you. So, yes, welcome to this session. Now, how to choose between SharePoint list, SQL Azure, and Microsoft Dataverse.
And I'm Dr. Flo. I'm also known as Serge Luca. I'm a business application MVP based in Brussels, not far from Isabelle. I've been having MVP for 15 years. I'm the creator of an open source tool called the Power Platform BPM Toolkit, which is on GitHub. And just for information, there will be a new version in 2 weeks. So normally by the end of this week, actually. I'm also the author of the Microsoft course Power Automate in a Day. And with Isabelle, we co-created a company called Power Platform Associate.
Yes, so I'm Isabelle Van Campenhoudt. I'm from Brussels as well. I've been MVP for 10 years now on the data platform, and I've been working more than that, actually, because I started in 1999 with SQL Server, quite a long way already. So let's go to the agenda. No more self-marketing here. So the agenda of today will be the following. First, we will go through a little Power Platform overview, just to be sure that we are all on the same page. And then Serge will be delighted to present you Dataverse, so what you really need about Dataverse, because it's not a toy, it's not the new MS Access, it's something very, very interesting. Then we will compare Dataverse with SQL databases and SharePoint environment. And we will do that by using what we like to call go, no-go feature. So the main feature that you need to take into account when you start a project. After that, we will go to some cherry on the cake feature of Dataverse that can make a difference in your project. And of course, conclusion. So there is no need, or maybe a little need, to present the Power Platform anymore, but just have a quick look on it. So in the Microsoft Power Platform, you will find product for analytics and data, of course, Power BI, that's my playground. You will find Power Apps for application development, Power Automate for the process automation, that's really the playground of Serge. You can also find bots with Power Virtual Agent, and all of those tools are working with a lot of data connector, with artificial intelligence, if you want, and of course, with this new kit, Dataverse.
So how we work with Isabelle, we have defined what we call a Power Platform governance checklist, which is normally covered in another session. And the topic of, well, this session actually is one row in our checklist, you see, choosing between Azure SQL, SharePoint, Dataverse 14, right? And for this, we have defined, as Isabelle mentioned, different potential go, no-go features that we will go through in this session. Isabelle?
Yes, so one of the most important characteristic, if I may say, of the Power Platform is the amazing amount of connector. So you have almost 500 connectors there. And of course, you will find connector to Dataverse, connector to SQL Server, in the cloud, in Azure, or on premises, and for SharePoint online, on premises if you still suffer to have that kind of architecture.
Nobody does do that.
No, we are all maybe with legacy. That's not a problem at all. So where to start? When you start a project on the Power Platform, maybe the first thing to think about is, do I have already the data? And if you have existing data, maybe the best thing to do is to keep them where they are. So because they are connector. And even if your data are on premises, but you have a good connectivity, you can use the enterprise data gateway and you can easily communicate with your actual data source. That's not a problem. But if you are starting from scratch, you may consider the usage of Dataverse. So you will need to evaluate if Dataverse will fit your needs. So we have this list of go, no-go features that we will now explore. But before that, Serge will explain you how Dataverse really works and what's behind the curtain.
So yes, what do you really need to know about Dataverse? So as you mentioned, Isabelle, Dataverse is not really Access, but nobody remember what Access is because we are all guys, right? So these people are young guys, so they have no clue of what Access is. It does not exist, right? It was a nightmare. No, it was interesting. So Dataverse is something very complex. It's not a toy, it's a real professional tool. There are many features in Dataverse. We need more than one session just for Dataverse. So there are different criteria like security, authentication, authorization, auditing. We need to analyze the role-based security. We can put logic in the backend, calculated field, Rollup. We can create custom jobs. We can put business rules, even workflow, the old type of workflow. We call that legacy workflow. There are different types of storages. We can hook up Dataverse with the backend, like Azure Function, thing like this. Okay, so it's a complex system. It's not a toy, and it's more than a database. Okay, it's more than storage. It's also an application server. It's the backend of Dynamic 365, which is could be mission critical, of course. So it's interesting. There are two configurations of Dataverse. The Dataverse, which is not free, require premium license for the makers and also for the end users. And Dataverse for Team, which is free. It comes with the Microsoft 365 license. So it's not really free, but it's almost free because the whole world is running Office 365, right? So, I mean, but there are some limitations that we will cover. Dataverse is a complex system that runs, of course, in Azure. And we interact with Dataverse by calling a web API directly or indirectly. When we call this web API, so we can call it from any platform, okay, not just the Power Platform, for .NET, from Java, from PHP, for you name it. We go to a load balancer, and then we go through web server, jobs server, sandbox server, reporting server, because yes, we can create reports in the Dataverse. And then we go to the storage part of Dataverse. And the storage is made of basically two things. We have a pool of SQL Server, which is automatically managed by Microsoft. That's for the relational data. We have Azure Blob Storage. So in Dataverse, you can put relational data or files or a combination of both. Then the system will transparently put your information in the Blob Storage or in the relational data, and we retrieve that transparently. So you don't need people to maintain that. That's completely done by Microsoft, as long as you pay for it, of course. Cosmos DB is used internally for managing the log. So normally you cannot directly interact with Cosmos DB, right? So there's no business case for that in Dataverse. But there is a search engine in Dataverse, so you can make search on your application data. That's very interesting. We'll get back to this later. And we can interact Dataverse with data lake and make more complex analytics on top of that. Dataverse can be hooked up with another backend, with the Azure backend, like Azure Functions, Event Hub, Service Bus, Kubernetes, and also data lake. So it's complex, but you don't see this complexity. You don't manage this complexity. Microsoft does that for you. You just need to pay. Dataverse for Team is more or less the same animal, the same beat. We have a pool of SQL Server Elastic behind, also automatically managed by Microsoft, so including the backup, blob storage for the document, Cosmos DB, which is used internally for the logs, but there's no search engine here. So you cannot use that from Dataverse for Team application. How can you use Dataverse? It's pretty easy. First, you need to create an environment. That's easy, okay? Create a new environment, and you just need to specify that you want a database. There is one database per environment, and this database is actually Dataverse. So Microsoft uses Dataverse internally for its own usage, and you can use that for your own application if you want. Then you need to create a table. Easy, create a table from Power Apps Studio interface, just create a table. And when you create a table, you can specify many things, like if you want attachment to be enabled in the database, in which case you can store files as well, several files for each record. Then you can secure the table, so you can specify who can do what in the table. And then your database is ready, you can call it. So you can call it by you can call it directly or indirectly by calling directly or indirectly a web API, so connectors, for instance. If you call the web API directly, which is actually a REST API, you can do this. You want to retrieve data from the expense table, then you get JSON. That means that anyone from any platform can interact with Dataverse. So it's not just for the Power Platform. But of course, the best way to do it is to use Power Platform connectors. So just create a Power Apps application, specify that you want to add data here, then you get the list of all the data in your database, in the database of your current environment, and you select, for instance, expense. And then you can use the full power of the Power Apps language, which is PowerFX. Here we filter all the expenses where the column total is greater than 1,000. Easy, right? So that's easier than manipulating REST API, etc. You can also call Dataverse by using Dataverse connectors in Power Automate. Just use the Dataverse connector and you get a bunch of action, very interesting action, like list rows, specify the row name, and the search criteria, total greater than 1,000, as we did in Power Apps. If you want more flexibility and more power, instead of doing this, providing a OData filter, you can use the internal language of Dataverse, query language, which is FetchXML. So you can do more advanced things if you want. I will get back to this. Also,
yes, if you are like me, a little curious, you may ask yourself, is a table in Dataverse like one table in Azure SQL? Actually, it is. So you can use your old management studio to connect to the environment with the specific names that you can retrieve easily on your Power Platform interface. Then you authenticate with your Azure sign-in, and then you will see the database itself. And in the database, you are able to see not only the default table that are created from the common data model, but also the custom table that you have created. But that's only when you want to see it, because you can't do anything there, which is better, of course, because it's all managed by Dataverse itself. But the message here is that one table is one table. There is no extra.
And also you cannot screw up the database because you cannot create store procedure, etc. So your database is always healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the FetchXML language that I mentioned before allow many things. So for instance, you can make author joins. If you like author joins in SQL, okay, you can create author joins. This code is similar to this one in SQL. More information in this reference here. And of course, to generate FetchXML, you can do that manually if you want, but you're not crazy. Well, I guess you're not. And you can use the free open source tool called XRM Toolbox, which is very nice. You will love it. And in this toolbox, you can add an add-in, which is a FetchXML builder, which allow you to graphically generate FetchXML. Okay, so you just graphically select what you want, and you get FetchXML, and you can copy and paste that into Power Automate. Or if you like the SQL Server syntax, you prefer SQL Server, you can add the SQL for CDS. CDS was the forum name of Dataverse. And this gives you the possibility to graphically select the table that you want, or to write SQL code and to generate FetchXML instruction that you can copy and paste into Power Automate. Easy, right? So now let's go to the go, no-go comparison criteria that Isabelle mentioned before. The first criteria for choosing between Azure SQL, SharePoint, Dataverse, and Dataverse for Team is the price. Of course, you get what you pay for. For Azure SQL, you need a premium license, and you need to pay for the storage. So every end user needs a premium license and need to pay for storage. For SharePoint, it's included in your Microsoft 365 license. Dataverse, you just need to buy a premium license and you get storage that comes with this license. And Dataverse for Team, you get it with Microsoft 365 license, but there are limitations. So each end user interacting with Dataverse or SQL must buy a premium license. Okay? That means if you buy the Power Apps per app license, so one app costs €4 per month. For 1,000 employees, that means €50,000 per year. And if you buy the per user license, that gives you a limited number of applications. That means for 1,000 employees, you have to pay €16, a bit less in dollars, a bit more, a bit less, yes. And that means almost €200,000 per year. So it's not nothing, right? There is a pay-as-you-go, which means you pay €8 per month per employee. If your employee click the application just once, you pay for the month, right? So you can start with pay-as-you-go if you don't know exactly which license scheme you need to go through, and then you can choose per user or per app. But pay-as-you-go is good for the beginning. So Dataverse storage price depends on the type of storage you are dealing with. If it's a database, a log, or files, price will be different. Dataverse for Team limitation is 2 GB of storage, 1 million of rows, which is a lot for many applications. That's always good enough for plenty of applications. So if you buy a premium license, you get storage in Dataverse. Per user, you get 10 GB of database and 20 GB for files, 2 GB for logs, which is a lot. If you want more storage in Dataverse, you can buy add-on. And add-on can be expensive, €33 for each gigabyte per month. But of course, Microsoft does everything behind. It does the backup, it does the maintenance, all the things is entirely done by Microsoft. You don't need any additional staffing for that. Now?
Yes, one of the points you may consider when you start your project is that the fact that you may have to choose between software as a service, infrastructure, or platform as a service. So if you go for Azure SQL storage, you will be on a platform as a service. That means that you will receive an empty house. So you will have maybe a little flat like an Azure DB, or a mansion like, you know, a big managed instance, your own instance, but you will receive only water, electricity, and gas, meaning high availability, backups, and so on. But you need to bring your furniture. You need to bring your staff. You will need a DBA, probably, and you will need professional developer. If you are using Dataverse or SharePoint, you are more in the same situation that when you are renting an Airbnb, for instance. You will have a house with furniture, appliance, even blanket, who knows. You will still need to cook. There is no specialized staff needed. You just pay for the storage, but a very specific one. And you can have citizen developer or pro developer in the case of Dataverse and Dataverse for Team as well. The storage capacity. Again, that is one of the points you need to ask yourself for your architecture. Up to can you go with your choice? If you are choosing Azure SQL, the biggest amount that you can have is 16 terabyte. So you can go up to 16 terabyte, although the most standard configuration will go up to 4 to 8 terabyte. with affordable price, I mean. For SharePoint, of course, there is the meta model on top of SQL, and you will have Azure blob storage behind. And actually, what will limit you on SharePoint is the limitation of the list, which is 30 million items by list. So that's a characteristic of SharePoint that is well known. Then for Dataverse, you will have up to 4 terabytes of storage. And in Dataverse for Team, like we said before, you are limited to 2 gigabytes of data and 1 million of row.
Sorry, I was answering a question in the chat.
Yeah, I've seen that. I see the chat moving.
There was a kind of throttling.
Okay. So another very important point is the business continuity. And I know that maybe you are like, okay, that's online. I do not have to care about that. It's taken in charge by Microsoft infrastructure, but still, there are very important concepts like, of course, the service level agreement. So we are comfortable here because you may have a quadruple 9 with Azure SQL, meaning that they are allowed to 1 hour per year, roughly. And for SharePoint Dataverse and Dataverse for Team, it is a 999, which is roughly 1 day, 1 big day of downtime a year. But what it is very important is to take into account stuff like how long does it take to be live again? How many data can I afford to lose? And also, what is the long-term retention of my backups, for instance? So in Azure SQL, you can go up to 10 years, but in SharePoint, by default, you have the 90 days retention with the recycle bins. With Dataverse, your backups will expire after a week. For those cases, you will need to rely on third-party tools to achieve a better storage of your archive. That's important.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm always saying important point, but I will say critical, of course. This time is that with each solution, you maybe throttle in a different way. So what it is important to compare the apples, it's the number of API calls by connection. So you may see that Azure SQL is the winner of calls, but Dataverse offers you a really nice 1,200 calls by connection by minute, which is very high as well. And SharePoint, yes, SharePoint is SharePoint. I do like SharePoint, don't get me wrong. The extensibility, Serge.
Yeah, so how can you extend your storage? So Azure SQL, you can extend that, of course, by writing the good old triggers and store procedure, but also you can extend Azure SQL by writing Power Automate code, which is my favorite option. SharePoint, it's like Power Automate and SharePoint Framework. Dataverse, we have good old legacy workflow. We call that workflow. You can write .NET code. We call that plugins, rollups, Power Automate workflows, and jobs. We can create custom jobs or use custom jobs. Dataverse for Team, it's Power Automate, and also we can put PowerFX in the database. We can also put PowerFX in the database for Dataverse. I need to upgrade my slide, but that's available now here. Now, how can you use Dataverse? How can you extend Dataverse? This is my expense application that display a list of expenses, and of course, behind one expense, we have line items, okay? So the question is, how can we calculate this, the total of each expense? Because you have to go through the line items. So one possibility, which is part of Dataverse, is to create a rollup field called total, and then we say that to calculate total, we have to go to the related line items table and make the sum of cost column. The thing is, this not trigger immediately. It can take 20 minutes to trigger. Okay, it takes some time. So my practice is to replace this with a flow, with a flow that is triggered when something changes in the table. Then the flow does the calculation and update the tool. That's how I work. Now, Dataverse for team, but also Dataverse, you can put PowerFX formula in the database. Like you have line items table, you have quantity and cost per unit columns, and you can create a column called line item cost with a formula based on PowerFX. So you get this, and that works. Okay, it's automatically calculated. So that's cool. So when it comes to security, there are different, we need to get into the details, security. So role-based security, Dataverse is really the champion for role-based security. Before Azure SQL, I will give you more details about this. Followed by SharePoint and followed by Dataverse for team. So example, record sharing. Can you share unique records? In SharePoint, we call that unique permission. Can you do that with Azure SQL? Yes. We can, of course, do that with SharePoint. There are 5,000 limitations per list. We can do that for Dataverse, but we cannot do that for Dataverse for team, even though we have role-based security. Security at the column level, we can do that with Azure SQL. We cannot do that for SharePoint. We'll never be able to do that in SharePoint. We can do that in Dataverse. We cannot do that in Dataverse for team. Hierarchy, what is that? If you want to, and I will give you other example. If you want to say, if Isabelle put data in the database, I want Isabelle managers to be able to see the data that she creates. You see, that's an example of hierarchy. So you can only do that in Dataverse. So you can specify, and you have to specify a security role when you define your Dataverse database. So you can specify what happens when someone create, read, modify, share, own a record. So you can specify that the whole organization can see that. The business unit, the child business unit can see it, or the business unit you are part of can see it, or only you can see the record that you create. You see, for instance. So you can define security role, so it's quite easy. It's easier than in Azure SQL. And also we have hierarchy security that I mentioned before. You have one organization here. In this organization, you have subsidiary or department, HR and sales. And in HR, you have HR Belgium and HR China. It could have been Russia, but okay, HR China. And what you want to say is this. Use case, employee from HR here can see a record created by HR Belgium and HR China, but they cannot change them. To do this, you don't have to write code in Dataverse. It's just a setting. Or employee from HR China cannot see records created by employee in HR Belgium. See? Or records created by HR here should not be visible by HR Belgium and HR China. 0 line of code. Or records created by Serge should be visible by his manager. And 3 levels of hierarchy, the manager. So you can easily do that, okay? So somewhere, we don't have the time to go to the detail, but somewhere in the Power Platform admin, you can specify that you want to work with hierarchy model, and you can specify which table in the database need to play this, this game here, okay? And well, I don't want to show the details, but another scenario is records created by Serge should be available to sales managers and to people sales manager report to. Okay, you don't have to write code for this. Just a few settings in Dataverse. Yes. Now, when it comes to Dataverse for team security, you can, of course, create a teams, an application in these teams. You get an environment for free. You get a database for free. And you can specify that people, so the application that you create in this team can be shared with the rest of the company. So people who want to interact with this application should not necessarily be part of your team. But you can specify the type of security that these people have. You can specify that they have full access, or they can just read the record, but they cannot change it, or they can create read, but they cannot update or delete, things like this. You see, so you don't have security at the record level, but you have role-based security still, for free.
Another point, transaction. Are you able to do real transaction into Dataverse? So we already know that, of course, you can do it on a SQL environment, explicit ones, I mean. In SharePoint, you can't. Again, explicit transaction, but in Dataverse, Serge, is it possible?
Yeah, so actually to do transaction in Dataverse, you have to rely on Power Automate, so you have to create a flow. And in this flow, you need to use the action perform a change set request. And there you can put your action that will work in an atomic way. That means that if one of the action fail, the whole change will roll back. If this one fail, even though this one was succeeded, everything will roll back. You see, so that's very easy in Dataverse. So some applications require Dataverse. Dataverse, not Dataverse for team. It's the case of Power Apps Portal. So Power Apps Portal is a way to create public website and extranet like this. Model-driven apps. So model-driven apps, you need to start from Dataverse, where you define your database. So you have a data model, and from that you can generate forms and views. Okay, so it's an example of Dataverse, of model-driven apps. And if you want to deal with AI Builder, which is AI for citizen developers in your application, so AI Builder requires Dataverse internally, okay? Even though Power Apps Portal requires Dataverse, you can still extend it by writing Power Automate code, you see? You can use Azure SQL that will, you can create Power Automate flows that will interact with Azure SQL or that will interact with SharePoint. Same for model-driven apps. Even though you need to start from Dataverse, still your application can interact with Azure SQL and SharePoint because you can hook it up for Automate Flow, for instance. It's not the case for AI Builder.
No, it's time to talk about some cherries on the cake, meaning some Dataverse feature that can make a difference in your project, but that may not be that important, but still, of course, one of them is the Dataflow integration. So Dataflow is what you can also think about like Power Query, but online. So for people coming from the Power BI landscape, you already know what it is that Power Query and what it is that Dataflow. But you also have Dataflow available in the Power Apps and Power Automate environment. And this is a tool that will allow you to copy data from data source, to transform them and to refresh them. There are two kinds of data flow. You have the data flow that will write data into a Dataverse format, and then you will have data flow for more analytics data. Those are the same as the data flow that you can use in Power BI, and they will put the data in an Azure data lake implicitly or explicitly if you configure it. And of course, the big asset of it is that you can refresh and schedule that. There will be different possibility in your data flow integration. If you are on Dataverse, of course, you will have more enterprise possibility, like the support for the gateway, which is not available for Dataverse for Team. Same for the schedule refresh, same for the incremental refresh. So again, that's difference. Also, the connector will not be the same between Dataverse and Dataverse for Team. So in the Dataverse connector, you will have the full list of it, meaning that you will be able to go to some very specific data source, even a DBC one if you want. In the Dataverse for Team, you will have the main connectors. that will allow you to integrate those data if you want.
Yeah, there is also some other benefit that Dataverse provide, which is offline support. If you create a model-driven application, for instance, well, you can expect that if the user on his mobile, for instance, lose internet connectivity, you might want the data to be cached locally and automatically resynchronized. So in Dataverse, this is out of the box. Of course, you can implement that on your own way on other storages. There's no automatic support in Dataverse for team, but in Dataverse, that out of the box, you just need to do this. You go to your environment and you specify in mobile configuration that you want this and this and this table. So you have to specify the table that need to play this game, and you can even specify for which user you want the data to be available offline. And then the synchronization will take place automatically. That's cool. That's I won't say that for free because you have to pay for the Dataverse license. It's not in Dataverse for team, but that's cool nevertheless. Also, one of my favorite feature is the search, because when you create application, you expect user to be able to search for data and documents. So in Dataverse, your tables can be indexed, crawled, and they can be searched, because there is a search engine that Dataverse interact with, which is the Azure Cognitive Search that you can use without having to deal with Dataverse, of course, in your own custom application if you want. And documenting tables in Dataverse table can also be indexed by this engine. And the syntax for retrieving your data is based on the open source Lucerne, which is Apache, query syntax, which is an industry standard. So you can do fuzzy search, proximity search, thing like this. More details in this document, but if you go to Power Automate, you can use a search row action. So you can make a search from here. And for instance, if you type eGuide and you want to get all the terms that look like Ignite, for instance, just put tilde in the search query, and then you'll get Ignite among others, right? So that's interesting. You can also do prefix search and postfix search. So I don't think we cannot do prefix search in SharePoint, but you can do that in Dataverse, right? Yes. I'm a SharePoint lover, so don't worry. Also, auditing and then compliance is important. So compliance is very efficient in Dataverse. You can audit at the environment level, so you can specify in the Power Platform admin that you want to start auditing at the environment level. You can audit at the database table level, so it's just specify your table and select here, audit change, any change. You can audit at the column, so the field level, you can specify which column you want to audit. And of course, you can audit even the IT activities. So example, you can say, you can get to the audit log, you can make search in the audit log, you can filter, you can search, and you can retrieve the different action. You can say, hey, this guy did update this record, you see, in the entity expense process. You can do that, but you can also audit what IT did. Example, you can specify that you want to audit these settings. When someone enable audit, you can audit when someone enable or disable audit, and you will retrieve this information in the logs, you see, easily, easier than in Azure SQL. So that's pretty cool. So we can spend an additional hour into talking about Dataverse, but
it's time for conclusion.
It's time for conclusion, right?
Yes, of course. So in our conclusion, I think that we have made the point that Dataverse is not a toy. It's a really robust and very rich system. Also, in the meantime, if you already have your data somewhere and you can easily access it with performance and you have the staffing that is required to use it, just keep your data where it is. You need to be pragmatic, of course, and not religious, never. You cannot be wrong by using SQL Azure, but of course, you need the staffing for that. So if you already have a team of SQL developer and DBA, go for it. Why not? In most cases, Dataverse is really a great software as a service solution. Think about the fancy Airbnb with a super host and 5-star. It gives you, of course, many of the dynamic 365 feature. If you are coming for that playground, that will be really nice for you to use it. And of course, you can combine. You are not religious as well, so you can combine your SQL source, your SharePoint, your Dataverse, because we have the connectors. So it's up to you. Do not forget Dataverse for Teams and SharePoint in your assessment. And you will not be blocked by starting with Dataverse for Team at all, because you can upgrade. So now, let's the fun begin, Serge.
Thank you very much for attending this session. Thank you, Chirac.
Thank you. No, great session. Great.
Don't forget to rate our session.